The rising sun painted the sky of Chicago with orange hues as William Thompson opened the curtains of his mansion in Beverly Hills. At 45, the owner of one of the largest technology companies in America, he gazed at his immaculate gardens with a distant look, while Buddy, his loyal golden-haired Labrador companion, rested near his feet. The 2,000 square meter property, surrounded by high walls and state-of-the-art security systems, was his private refuge from the outside world. William had built a financial empire by developing security software, but ironically, the more his fortune grew, the more he distanced himself from human contact. His days followed a meticulously planned routine. He woke up early, worked remotely from his private office, and his only interactions were with his staff, all carefully selected and kept at a calculated professional distance. The only exception in his life was Buddy, a gift from his late mother 5 years ago. The Labrador had become his family, his silent confidant. Together, they shared long walks through the garden on Sunday afternoons, moments when William allowed his emotional barriers to lower slightly. "Only you truly understand me, don't you, Buddy?" he murmured, while stroking the dog's ears, who responded with an affectionate gaze and a gentle lick on his hand. The mansion, though luxurious, carried an air of loneliness that not even the staff could dispel. The walls were adorned with valuable works of art, but no family photos. The only portrait was of his mother, Eleanor, a woman with a gentle smile, who had left behind a void that William tried to fill with work and isolation. That particular morning, something felt different. The air was heavier, as if foreshadowing a significant change. Margaret, the housekeeper who had worked for him for a decade, noticed his restlessness during breakfast. "Are you all right, Dr. Thompson? You seem worried," she asked as she served his usual coffee. "I'm fine, Margaret, just thoughtful," he replied without elaborating. Margaret was probably the person who knew him best, after Buddy, but even so William kept his emotions locked away tightly. The truth was that William had been feeling a growing dissatisfaction with his reclusive life. His mother's words echoed in his mind more frequently. "Son, money can't buy happiness. The true value lies in the connections we make with others." As he sipped his coffee, William watched through the window the activity in the upscale neighborhood. Families strolling, children heading to school, people living their lives connected to one another. His tech empire had created digital barriers to protect millions, but he himself had built emotional walls that kept him a prisoner of his own loneliness. Buddy, sensing his owner's contemplative mood, approached and rested his head on William's knee, as he always did when he felt William needed comfort. The businessman smiled, one of the few genuine smiles he allowed himself to show. "Maybe it's time for a change, Buddy," he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. But where to start? The answer to that question would come sooner than he expected, and in a way that would completely change the course of his life. That afternoon, as he reviewed some contracts in his office, the phone rang. It was Sophia Martinez, the director of the local animal shelter, with a request that would set off a series of events, transforming not only his life, but also that of the entire community around him. William hesitated before answering, as he always did with unscheduled calls, but something, perhaps fate, perhaps his own growing restlessness, made him pick up the phone. That seemingly simple decision would be the first step on a journey that would force him to confront his deepest fears and question everything he had built up to that point. Sophia Martinez had a warm voice that contrasted with the cold and distant tone William usually used in his phone conversations. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize for bothering you directly, but we have a delicate situation at the shelter that urgently needs your help," she explained, her voice conveying a mix of hope and concern. The businessman adjusted himself in his Italian leather chair, intrigued. His annual donations to the animal shelter were always generous, but anonymous. How had she gotten his private number? "Margaret, your housekeeper, gave me your contact," Sophia continued, as if reading his thoughts. "She mentioned your love for animals and how Buddy changed your life. Mr. Thompson, our shelter is facing a crisis. The land where we've operated for 20 years has been sold, and we only have 3 months to find a new location for our 200 animals." William felt Buddy approach, as if understanding he was being mentioned in the conversation. The Labrador rested his snout on his leg, his brown eyes fixed on his owner's face. "Miss Martinez, I can make a more substantial donation this year," William began, but was interrupted. "It's not just money we need, Mr. Thompson. Your property has a considerable area that isn't being used. We came to ask if we could temporarily use the old abandoned training center at the back of your property as a provisional shelter." The request caught William completely off guard. The training center had been built to host in-person courses for his company. But with the pandemic, all activities had gone remote and the space had been empty for years. "That would involve people coming and going on my property," he replied, the tension evident in his voice. "Yes, but we could establish strict access protocols. And honestly, Mr. Thompson, maybe this is exactly what we all need. The animals, the shelter, and—" She hesitated for a moment. "Maybe even you." The boldness of the comment should have irritated him, but something in Sophia's sincerity made him pause. His eyes landed on the photo of his mother on the wall. Eleanor always said that the best decisions in life were the ones that took us out of our comfort zone. "Can I visit the current shelter?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. On the other end of the line, Sophia couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. "Of course, we can welcome you whenever you'd like. In fact, tomorrow we're having an adoption event. It would be a great opportunity to meet our team and see our work." William scheduled the visit for the next morning, surprising even himself, with how quickly he made the decision. After hanging up, he stood contemplating the garden through the window of his office. The idea of opening his property to strangers went against everything he had built over the past few years. His fortune and his reserved lifestyle had become his fortress against the outside world. Margaret, who had entered quietly with a cup of tea, watched her employer with a subtle smile. "Sophia is an incredible person, isn't she? She's turned that shelter into a true sanctuary." "Did you plan this, Margaret?" William asked, turning to face her. The housekeeper shrugged, but her eyes sparkled. "Sometimes we need a little push to do the right thing, sir, and you have so much more to offer beyond your money." That night, William had trouble sleeping. Images of his property being invaded by strangers mingled with memories of his mother caring for abandoned animals in the backyard of his childhood home. Buddy, sensing his restlessness, stayed awake by his side, offering the silent comfort of his presence. The next morning, as William prepared for his visit to the shelter, he had no idea that he was about to embark on a journey that would not only change his life, but also place him at the center of a plot that would test his deepest values and his ability to trust people again. The Love Animal Shelter was located in a remote area of the city, surrounded by ancient trees that provided generous shade to the outdoor kennels and cat enclosures. William parked his black Range Rover at the simple entrance of the place, observing the movement of volunteers who were already starting their morning tasks. Buddy, in the passenger seat, was more restless than usual, as if sensing the adventure that awaited them. Sophia was waiting for them at the entrance, wearing a light blue lab coat with the shelter's logo. Her genuine smile and confident demeanor contrasted with the image William had mentally constructed. She didn't look older than 35, and her green eyes conveyed a determination that reminded him of his mother. "Mr. Thompson, what punctuality! And this must be the famous Buddy." Sophia bent down to greet the Labrador, who immediately responded with an enthusiastic wag of his tail. "Come on, I'll show you our reality." The tour of the shelter revealed an operation far more organized and professional than William had expected. The spaces, though simple, were clean and well-maintained. Volunteers worked in harmony, some cleaning the areas, others administering medications, and several spending time playing with the animals. "Currently, we take care of 220 animals," Sophia explained as they walked. "We have a team of 3 volunteer veterinarians who take turns, 50 regular volunteers, and a small permanent staff of 10 people. We manage to keep everything running thanks to donations and a lot of love." William observed everything with an analytical gaze, as if evaluating a company for acquisition, but something was beginning to change within him. The energy of the place, the sound of the volunteers' laughter mixed with joyful barks, created an atmosphere he hadn't experienced in a long time. "And here is our biggest challenge right now. Sophia pointed to a framed document on the wall of her small office, the eviction notice. The new owner of the land wants to build a luxury condominium. We've already managed to delay the inevitable. For 6 months, but now... Her voice was interrupted by a commotion coming from the yard. A girl of about 12 years old had arrived with her mother, bringing a puppy they had found on the street. The little animal was trembling, clearly frightened. "Excuse me," Sophia said, quickly stepping out to attend to the emergency. William followed her, watching as she skillfully calmed both the puppy and the worried girl. "Emma, you did the right thing by bringing him here," Sophia smiled at the girl. "Would you like to help take care of him while we do the checkup?" The girl's eyes lit up. "Can I really?" "Of course. In fact, we're always in need of young volunteers like you. Have you ever thought about joining our junior program?" William observed the interaction with growing interest. Buddy, by his side, seemed perfectly at ease, interacting with other dogs through the kennel gates. It was then that he noticed an elderly man in a corner of the yard, sitting on a bench surrounded by several cats. There was something familiar about him. "That's Mr. Vincent," Sophia explained, returning after sending the puppy for a veterinary evaluation. "He's been coming here every day since he lost his wife 2 years ago. He says the animals saved his life, giving him a new purpose for his days." The words hit William like a punch to the gut. Wasn't that exactly what he was doing? Hiding away in his mansion with only Buddy as his real connection to the world? "Sophia," he began, his voice softer than usual, "about the space on my property." But before he could continue, a tall, well-dressed man hurried into the shelter, his face red with irritation. William recognized him immediately. Richard Almeida, the biggest real estate developer in the area. "Miss Martinez, we need to talk," his voice was commanding. "I've just learned that you're trying to secure a new space in the neighborhood. I've made it clear that this shelter doesn't align with the profile we want to develop for the area." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The volunteers stopped their activities, watching the scene with apprehension. Sophia remained calm, but William could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Almeida, we have every right to look for a new location. You yourself gave us a 3-month deadline." "Not when it interferes with my other projects," he retorted, then noticed William's presence. His expression changed completely. "William Thompson? What are you doing here?" Fate had placed before William a choice that would change not only his future, but that of hundreds of lives, human and animal alike. The decision he would make in the next few moments would set off a chain of events that no one could predict. The silence that settled over the shelter courtyard was almost palpable. William felt all eyes on him, including Buddy's, who stood alertly by his side. Richard Almeida's expression wavered between surprise and concern, as if the presence of the reclusive tech entrepreneur could destabilize his carefully laid plans. "Richard," William replied with studied calm, "I'm here evaluating a potential partnership with the shelter. I wasn't aware you had interests in the area." The developer adjusted his expensive tie, trying to regain his composure. "William, can we speak privately? I believe you're unaware of some important details regarding this matter." Sophia watched the interaction with growing interest, noting the sudden shift in Richard's behavior. It was clear that William's presence had completely altered the dynamics of the situation. "Any matter related to the shelter can be discussed with Miss Martinez present," William declared, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "In fact, I'm considering offering the space of the old training center on my property for the temporary relocation of the shelter." Richard's face visibly paled. "You can't be serious. That area... William, we really need to talk in private. There are bigger projects at stake." At that moment, Emma, the girl who had brought the puppy earlier, timidly approached the group holding a drawing. "Mr. Thompson, I made this for you and Buddy." She extended the paper, where she had drawn the golden Labrador surrounded by other animals from the shelter. The innocent gesture momentarily broke the tension. William took the drawing, feeling something stir within him, a memory of when he himself, as a child, used to draw the animals his mother rescued. "Thank you, Emma," he smiled, a genuine smile he hadn't shown in public for a long time. Turning back to Richard, his tone changed. We'll talk in private, but not today. Schedule a meeting with my secretary for next week. Richard hesitated, clearly displeased but aware that he was at a disadvantage at that moment. You don't understand what's at stake here, William. Some decisions can't be undone. With those cryptic words, he left, leaving an air of apprehension behind. Sophia let out a sigh she didn't realize she was holding. Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you for stepping in, but I also don't want you to put yourself in a difficult position because of us. William looked at Emma's drawing again, deep in thought. You know, Sophia, I've spent the last few years building digital security systems, protecting information and fortunes, but maybe I forgot to protect what truly matters. The rest of the visit took on a new meaning. William spent the next few hours exploring every corner of the shelter, listening to the volunteers' stories, and observing how Buddy naturally interacted with all the animals. Mr. Vincent, the elderly man he had noticed earlier, approached him during a quieter moment. Your mother would be proud, the old man said, catching William completely off guard. Eleanor always said you had a heart bigger than your fears. You knew my mother, Vincent smiled. She was one of the first volunteers at this shelter over 20 years ago. I've never forgotten how she spoke of her brilliant son, who would one day understand that true wealth lies in opening your heart to the world. Mr. Vincent's words struck William deeply. How many connections to his mother's past had he lost in his self-imposed isolation? How many stories had he never heard because he kept everyone at a distance? At the end of the day, as William prepared to leave, Sophia approached him one last time. Mr. Thompson, regardless of your decision about the space, thank you for today. You've given us something that's been in short supply around here, hope. On the way back home, William reflected on the day's events. Richard's veiled threats, Emma's drawing, the memories of his mother brought up by Mr. Vincent. It all swirled in his mind, forcing him to question the walls he had built around himself. Buddy slept peacefully in the passenger seat, seemingly exhausted after a day of intense socializing. William noticed that his loyal companion seemed happier and more relaxed than ever. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to tear down some walls, both literal and metaphorical. What William didn't yet know was that his decision to help the shelter would set off a chain of revelations connecting his past, Richard's real estate empire, and long-buried secrets about his own family. The visit to the shelter wasn't just the start of a personal transformation. It was the first step toward a truth that would forever change his understanding of his place in the world. That night, William couldn't sleep. After hours of tossing and turning, he decided to go down to his office. Buddy followed him faithfully, as always. Sitting in his leather armchair, he began sifting through old boxes containing his mother's documents, something he hadn't done since her passing. Among yellowed papers and old photographs, he found a journal. Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled page after page with stories of the shelter and its animals. As he read, William discovered a side of his mother he had never known. Her deep involvement with the animal cause went far beyond what he had imagined. March 12, 1995. Today, Richard showed up again with an offer to buy the shelter's land. He said he'd turn the area into a luxury residential complex. I tried to explain the importance of our work, but all he sees are numbers. There's something in his eyes that worries me, an unchecked ambition that seems to consume any trace of humanity. William felt a shiver run down his spine. Had Richard been trying to acquire that land for that long? He kept reading, now completely absorbed in his mother's words. June 15th, 1995. Charles Thompson, my William, continues to work tirelessly at his tech company. Sometimes I worry that he's isolating himself too much from the world. Today he installed more security cameras at home. I understand his desire for protection, but I fear these physical barriers are turning into emotional walls. His mother's words hit him like a punch to the gut. Even years ago, she had already noticed the path of isolation he was heading down. He kept flipping through the diary until a particular entry caught his attention. September 20th, 1995. I've discovered something disturbing about Richard's true plans for the area. It's not just a real estate venture. The documents I found suggest a much larger scheme, I need to protect this information. If anything happens to me, everything is hidden where only true love can find it." William sat up straight in his chair. His mother had uncovered something important, something she had hidden. But where? The last sentence was cryptic. Where only true love can find it. Buddy, who had been sleeping at his feet, suddenly stood up, his ears alert. The sound of the doorbell cut through the silence of the early morning. William checked the clock. 3:47 a.m. Through the security cameras, he saw Sofia Martinez standing at his gate, appearing very agitated. Against all his instincts for caution, William authorized her entry. Minutes later, Sofia entered his office, breathless and with teary eyes. "I'm sorry to show up like this, Mr. Thompson, but something serious has happened. Someone broke into the shelter tonight. They turned everything upside down, especially the old files, and they left this." She held out a crumpled piece of paper with a typed message. "Some secrets should remain buried. Last chance to back out." William felt his heart race. The coincidence was too disturbing. He had been reading about secrets from the past, just as Sofia appeared with evidence that someone else was searching for something. "There's more," Sofia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I found this among the messed up files." She pulled an old photograph from her bag, showing Eleanor Thompson embracing a young woman who looked very much like Sofia. "That's my mother, Amanda Martinez," Sofia explained. "She worked at the shelter with your mother for years. They were best friends. I was very young at the time, I barely remember, but—" "Why have you never mentioned this before?" William interrupted, his mind struggling to process this new information. "Because my mother made me promise, before she left, that I would only reveal this connection if it was absolutely necessary. She said that one day I would understand. Mr. Thompson, I think that day has come." Buddy, who had been watching the scene closely, approached Sofia and began sniffing her bag with unusual interest. From it, a small metallic object fell, an old key with a heart-shaped pendant. William picked up the key, his hands trembling slightly. The pendant had the initials EM engraved, Eleanor Thompson. Her last words in the diary echoed in his mind. "Where only true love can find." "Sofia," he said, his voice low but firm, "I think our mothers left much more than just memories. They left clues, and someone is desperate to find them before we do." The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink. William and Sofia exchanged glances, aware that they were about to embark on a journey that would reveal long-buried truths, truths that could change not only their lives, but the fate of the entire shelter, and perhaps even the whole community. The early hours of the morning found William and Sofia in Eleanor Thompson's old room, now preserved as a sanctuary of memories. Buddy accompanied them, sniffing every corner of the room with renewed interest, as if he too were part of the search. "Did your mother keep a safe or a special place to store important documents?" Sofia asked, carefully examining an old, solid, wood dressing table. William shook his head, deep in thought. Eleanor was different. She didn't trust safes or conventional security systems. She said the most important secrets should be kept in plain sight, protected only by people's inability to truly see what's right in front of them. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the room. The walls were decorated with various framed photographs. Eleanor with shelter animals, with volunteers, with William as a child. One in particular caught her attention, her mother sitting on a garden bench wearing a necklace with a pendant identical to the key Sofia had brought. "The necklace," William murmured, stepping closer to the photo. "She never took that necklace off. She said it was her most precious treasure, a gift from a very special friend." Sofia stepped closer, her eyes shining with recognition. "My mother had one just like it. She said it was a symbol of a promise they had made together." At that moment, Buddy began barking insistently at a specific spot on the wall, exactly where a large oval mirror with an ornate frame of branches and flowers hung. That mirror, William said, old memories surfacing, was her favorite. She would spend hours sitting in front of it, always saying that true beauty lies in the eyes of those who truly know how to see. Carefully, they removed the heavy mirror from the wall. Behind it, There was a small niche disguised in the wallpaper. Inside, they found an old heart-shaped music box. "The key," Sophia whispered, picking up the object she had brought with her. The heart-shaped pendant fit perfectly into the lock of the box. As they turned the key, a soft melody began to play. "Over the Rainbow," Eleanor's favorite song. Inside the box, they found a yellowed envelope and an old flash drive. "Dear William," the letter began, written in his mother's elegant handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means the moment I feared has come. Sophia must be with you. Yes, I knew you two would meet one day. Amanda and I left clues that only the two of you together could uncover." William had to pause, his voice choked with emotion. Sophia gently took the letter and continued reading. "What we discovered about Richard Almeida and his true plans for the region goes far beyond mere real estate speculation. He doesn't just want the shelter's land, he wants the entire area, including the property where you live now, William. The reason is documented on the flash drive, but the most important thing is hidden where it all began. In the place where your love for animals first touched your heart." "The old house," William exclaimed, his eyes widening with realization. "Our first home, where we lived before I made my fortune with the company. That's where Mum started rescuing animals, where it all began." Buddy, who had been quiet during the reading, began wagging his tail vigorously at the mention of the old house. It was as if the animal understood the significance of the discovery. "We need to go there," Sophia said, checking the time. "But first, we should check the contents of this flash drive. It might give us more clues about what exactly we're looking for." William agreed, but something was bothering him. "Sophia, I don't think we're alone in this search. The invasion of the shelter, the threat. Someone else knows about these documents. And that someone is one step behind us," Sophia added, her expression serious. "Your mother and mine planned all of this. They knew that one day we would need to find this evidence together." As they headed to the office to examine the flash drive, William couldn't help but notice how drastically his life had changed in just 24 hours. From recluse to partner in an investigation about secrets from the past, all because of a plea for help for an animal shelter. What they didn't yet know was that each revelation brought them not only closer to the truth, but also to danger. As they climbed the stairs toward the office, a figure watched the mansion from afar through binoculars. Richard Almeida was not willing to let long-buried secrets come to light, not when he was so close to realizing his plans. William's office was quiet except for the soft hum of the computer booting up. His hands trembled slightly as he inserted the flash drive found in the music box. Sophia stood beside him, equally tense, while Buddy remained alert, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "These are old files," William murmured, navigating through the folders. They seemed to be scanned documents from 1995. The files revealed a complex web of information, old blueprints of the area, purchase and sale contracts, and a series of emails exchanged between Richard Almeida and various local politicians of the time. But it was one particular document that made William freeze. "This is impossible," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen. "This is the original plan for the area, the land where my mansion is, the shelter, all of it." It was an old protected environmental reserve. Sophia leaned in to get a better look, and according to this, the area was deprotected through a process full of irregularities. Richard obtained the permits through bribes? "Not just that," William continued, opening more documents. "There was an important spring here. Richard's current project isn't just a luxury condominium. He plans to dam the spring to create an exclusive artificial lake that would destroy the entire environmental balance of the region. And it would affect the water supply of several nearby neighborhoods," Sophia added, understanding the scale of the problem. "Your mother and mine discovered this years ago." A video file caught their attention. It was an old recording made by Eleanor Thompson. In the video, she showed the spring in its natural state and documented the rich biodiversity of the area. Eleanor's voice narrated, "This area isn't just a piece of land. It's a natural sanctuary that has been preserved for generations. What Richard plans to do here is more than an environmental crime. It's erasing our history." William felt a lump in his throat as he heard his mother's voice. "We need to go to the old house now. If there's more evidence, that's where we'll find it." The old Thompson residence was about 40 minutes away, in a neighborhood that still retained a somewhat rustic charm. When they arrived, William was surprised to see that the house, though clearly unoccupied, was well maintained. "I kept paying a gardener to maintain the place," he explained to Sophia. "I could never bring myself to let it go, even without fully understanding why." Buddy, who had come with them, started acting strangely as soon as they entered the backyard. The Labrador sniffed the ground intensely, running back and forth as if following an invisible trail. "The kennel," William exclaimed suddenly. "This is where Mum kept the first animals she rescued. She turned an old tool shed into a small shelter." Following Buddy, they reached the back of the property. The old kennel was covered in ivy, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. When William opened the rusty door, a wave of memories hit him. Afternoons helping his mother care for the animals, the smell of fresh food, the sound of joyful barks. Sophia watched everything with teary eyes. "My mom used to tell me stories about this place. She said it was here that she and her mother realized they had found their true calling." Buddy began scratching insistently at a specific spot on the concrete floor. William crouched down to take a closer look and noticed something. One of the concrete slabs was slightly misaligned from the others. With a joint effort, they managed to move the slab, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a plastic folder protected in a waterproof wrapper. The documents inside were even more impressive than those on the flash drive. Photos of secret meetings, records of suspicious bank transfers, and a detailed map of natural underground tunnels that connected the entire region through the spring. "Look at this." Sophia pointed to a handwritten note in the margin of the map. "Your mother wrote, 'Water always finds its way, just like the truth.' William, they weren't just protecting an animal shelter, they were protecting an entire ecosystem." A noise from the front of the house interrupted their discoveries. The headlights of a car illuminated the windows, and male voices could be heard approaching. Buddy began to growl softly, his ears alert. "There's someone else here," William whispered, quickly stashing the documents in his briefcase. "And something tells me they didn't come for a friendly visit." Sophia and William exchanged glances, aware that their findings had placed them in a potentially dangerous situation. The past their mothers had fought to preserve was about to collide with the present, and they would need to act quickly to protect not only the documents, but also the future of the entire region. Acting swiftly, William and Sophia turned off their phone flashlights. The old kennel had only one entrance, which now seemed more like a trap than an exit. Buddy remained completely silent, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. "There's a side passage," William whispered, recalling his childhood. "Mom used it to take the animals to the vet during the rain. It's behind those planks." Carefully, they removed the old wooden planks, revealing a narrow corridor that led to the side of the house. Sophia placed the documents in her waterproof bag while William checked the path. The voices grew closer. "They have to be here somewhere," they heard a deep voice say. "The boss is sure they'd come here." "William," Richard Almeida's voice echoed through the backyard, "I know you're here. Let's talk like civilized adults. This is all a big misunderstanding." Sophia and William exchanged glances in the dim light. Through a crack in the kennel wall, they could see 3 men with flashlights along with Richard searching the backyard. "They're going to find the moved tile," Sophia whispered. "They'll know we found something." William thought quickly. Years of developing security systems had taught him that sometimes the best defense is to create a distraction. He grabbed his phone and, through an app he had developed himself, remotely accessed the house's irrigation system. "When I say now, we run through the side passage. The sprinklers will turn on in 5 seconds, he instructed in a low voice. Buddy, demonstrating an almost supernatural understanding of the situation, positioned himself close to them, ready to follow their lead. "Now!" The sprinklers burst into action, spraying water in all directions. The men, caught off guard, began shouting and scrambling. William, Sophia, and Buddy slipped through the side passage, shielded by the darkness and chaos. "Over there," one of the men shouted, spotting movement. But it was too late. The trio had already reached the side street, where William's car was parked. Within seconds, they were inside the vehicle and speeding away. "They have copies of the documents," they heard Richard shout in frustration. "Find them!" William drove, skillfully through the neighborhood streets, taking alternate routes to shake off any potential pursuers. Sophia constantly checked the rearview mirror, while Buddy stayed alert in the back seat. "We need a safe place," Sophia said, her voice tense but controlled. "We can't go back to your house or the shelter. Those will be the first places they—" "Look," William nodded, making a sharp turn. "I know a place, a guest house I kept secret, registered under another name. Not even Richard knows about it." As they drove through the city, Sophia's phone buzzed, a message from Mr. Vincent. "Suspicious activity at the shelter. Several men claiming to be from the city want to conduct an emergency inspection. I didn't let them in. The volunteers are united. Stay safe." "Richard is playing on all fronts," William observed, his mind racing. He knows he's lost the element of surprise and is trying to regain control of the situation. After nearly an hour of detours to ensure they weren't being followed, they arrived at a modern yet discreet house in a quiet residential neighborhood. The security system was state-of-the-art. William hadn't skimped on protection. Once, inside the house, they could finally breathe and examine the documents more closely. The evidence was far more extensive than they had initially imagined. Beyond the scheme involving the spring, there were records of other irregular projects by Richard throughout the city. "He's not just after the shelter," Sophia concluded, organizing the papers. "His entire empire was built on irregularities. If this comes to light, he loses everything," William finished. "But we need to be smart. Richard has powerful connections, and confronting him directly would be dangerous." Buddy, who had been watching the street through a gap in the curtain, began wagging his tail, a signal William knew well. "Someone's coming," he said, tense. But when they looked at the security monitor, they saw a familiar face. Margaret, the housekeeper, was standing at the gate, and she wasn't alone. Beside her was an elderly woman who made Sophia gasp in recognition. "It's Mrs. Carmen!" she exclaimed. "My mother's best friend, but how did they find us?" William smiled for the first time since they left the old house. "Margaret always knew about this place. It was the contingency plan I created years ago, and she was the only person who knew its location." When they opened the gate, Margaret and Mrs. Carmen quickly entered, carrying an old folder. "You're not the only ones keeping secrets," Margaret said with a mysterious smile. "Eleanor and Amanda weren't the only ones keeping records, and I think it's time to put all the pieces of this puzzle together." Margaret and Mrs. Carmen settled into the safe house's living room, while Buddy strategically lay down between them, as if wanting to join the conversation that was about to begin. The folder they brought was placed on the coffee table with almost solemn reverence. "Before we open this," Mrs. Carmen began, her time-worn face carrying a serious expression, "you need to understand that there's much more at stake than just the shelter or the spring. There's a decades-long history of resistance and protection." Margaret served tea for everyone, a ritual she maintained even in the most tense situations. "Eleanor, Amanda, Carmen, and I were part of a group that called themselves the Guardians," she revealed, surprising both William and Sophia. "It started long before the shelter, when the area was still mostly untouched." Mrs. Carmen carefully opened the folder, revealing old photographs of the region. This place was known as the Valley of Springs. It wasn't just one spring, it was several, forming a unique underground water system that naturally supplied the entire region. Richard's father, Augustus Almeida, was the first to try to buy this land, Margaret continued. But he faced resistance from the traditional families of the area, especially the women who understood the importance of preserving the waters. Sophia picked up one of the photos, which showed 4 young women, their mothers and the 2 ladies in front of them, next to a lush green area. "The shelter wasn't chosen by chance, was it?" "No," Mrs. Carmen smiled. "Every inch of that land was strategically selected. The shelter was our way of keeping an eye on the most sensitive area of the spring system. The animals were our perfect excuse to always be around, monitoring any suspicious activity." William flipped through old documents with growing admiration. "So when Mom started rescuing animals, it was part of a bigger plan," Margaret added. "Helena had a natural gift with animals, and Amanda was brilliant with documentation and records. They turned an environmental protection mission into a true sanctuary. But Richard found out, Carmen continued, her face hardening. Just like his father. He's obsessed with that land. The difference is that Augustus was more direct in his actions. Richard? He's sneakier. He's been buying up surrounding properties, slowly building his empire, encircling the area he truly wanted. Sophia connected the dots. That's why he wants the shelter's land and William's property so badly. They're the last missing pieces to gain complete control over the spring system. Exactly, Margaret nodded. And there's more. Eleanor discovered something in the last few months before she passed, something that deeply troubled her. She started digitizing all the important documents and creating backup copies. Carmen pulled out one last envelope from the folder, still sealed. This is the last letter Eleanor wrote. She made us promise that we would only deliver it when the kennel documents were found. With trembling hands, William opened the envelope. The letter was short, but its contents made his eyes widen. Dear son, if you're reading this, then you and Sophia have finally found each other, and the pieces are starting to fall into place. What I discovered goes beyond the springs there. Our records of intentional contamination on some of the lands acquired by Richard. He created artificial environmental problems to devalue the areas and force families to sell their land. The latest report is hidden in the most obvious, yet safest, place I could think of, in the digital vault of his own company. The password is the one you always used as a child to name our rescued animals. With love, Mom. William let out an incredulous laugh. The digital vault. I designed that system myself. It's considered one of the most secure in the world. And the password, he looked at Buddy, remembering all the animals his mother had rescued over the years. Each one was given a name following the same pattern he had created as a child. We need to act fast, Sophia said, checking her phone. Mr. Vincent just sent a message. Richard is calling a press conference for tomorrow morning. He's going to announce the largest sustainable project in the city's history. He's trying to get ahead of us, Margaret observed. You know he lost important documents and wants to create a smokescreen. Buddy, who had been quiet until then, suddenly stood, up, his ears alert. Seconds later, they heard the sound of cars approaching. They found us, William said, quickly moving to check the security cameras. But this time we're prepared, and I think it's time to use technology to our advantage. Mrs. Carmen smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. The Guardians have protected these secrets for decades. Now it's time for the new generation to do their part. The group gathered around the table, planning their next steps. The final battle wouldn't be fought with violence or direct confrontation. It would be fought with intelligence, strategy, and the power of truth. And this time, they had not only the evidence, but also something Richard would never understand. The strength of a community united by a cause greater than themselves. The morning dawned with a different energy in Chicago. The convention center was packed for Richard Almeida's press conference, which promised to revolutionize the city's urban development. Journalists, business people, and politicians eagerly awaited the announcement of the mega project. Richard, impeccable in his Italian suit, smiled for the cameras with the confidence of someone who had the world in his hands. On the screen behind him, computer-generated images displayed a luxurious residential and commercial complex with an artificial lake as its crown jewel. This project is not just an enterprise, he began his speech. It's a dream of urban transformation, a legacy for future generations. His speech was interrupted when all the screens in the auditorium flickered simultaneously. The 3D project was replaced by a live video broadcast directly from the animal shelter. William Thompson, the reclusive tech entrepreneur, stood beside Sophia Martinez. "Good morning, Richard," William said, his voice echoing through the sound system. "I hope you don't mind this little technological intervention. After all, security systems are my specialty." Richard's face visibly paled. On stage, he tried to gesture for the broadcast to be cut, but nothing worked. "The city deserves to know the truth about this project," Sophia continued, "and about all the others that came before it." One by one, the uncovered documents began to appear on the screens. Reports of deliberate contamination, records of bribes, maps of the springs. The evidence was irrefutable. "But we're not here just to expose wrongdoing," William went on. "We're here to present an alternative." The image shifted to show a new project, one that preserved the springs and transformed the area into an integrated ecological park, with an animal sanctuary at its heart. "This is the true legacy we want to leave behind," Sophia explained. "A project developed in partnership with the country's leading universities, one that protects our waters and creates a space where nature and community can coexist." In the auditorium, Mr. Vincent stood up. "As the longest-standing resident of the area, I can confirm every word about the importance of these springs." Other residents began to rise, each sharing their story, their connection to the land. Margaret and Mrs. Carmen, strategically positioned among the audience, distributed copies of the historical documents to the press. The story of the Guardians, their decades-long silent struggle to protect those lands, was finally coming to light. Richard tried to take control of the situation. "This is an invasion, a smear campaign." "Actually," Eduardo's voice returned, "to the screens, it's a lesson in transparency. At this moment, all the evidence is being sent to the appropriate authorities, including what we found in the digital safe. Thank you for never realizing my mother had access to it." Buddy, who was next to Eduardo during the broadcast, barked as if he wanted to join in. The audience laughed, breaking the tension of the "a moment." "But we offer an alternative, Richard," Sophia proposed. "Instead of a legal battle that could drag on for years, we propose a partnership. Your expertise in construction would be invaluable for developing the ecological park sustainably." The proposal caught Richard off guard. He looked around, seeing the expressions of those present, feeling the weight of public opinion. His political connections, one by one, began to quietly distance themselves. 6 months later, the Springs Park was inaugurated. The old training center on William's property had been transformed into a modern expansion of the shelter, complete with a veterinary center and a communal area. William himself, once reclusive, was now actively involved in managing the project. Sophia coordinated not only the shelter, but also an entire environmental education program that attracted schools from across the city. Richard, surprisingly, had accepted the partnership proposal. Perhaps out of pragmatism, perhaps due to a genuine shift in perspective. His expertise in construction was crucial for developing sustainable structures in the park. On a quiet afternoon, William walked with Buddy through the park's gardens. The place that once had walls now featured living fences and open gates. Children played with the animals from the shelter. Elderly people rested on benches under the shade of trees, and the main spring had been transformed into a preserved natural fountain. "Your mother would be proud," Sophia said, approaching with a cup of coffee. Margaret and Mrs. Carmen followed close behind, bringing homemade cookies, a tradition they had maintained since the days of the Guardians. "They all would be," William replied, watching a group of young volunteers learning about environmental preservation. "They taught us that some fights are worth it, even if they seem impossible at first." Buddy barked joyfully, running off to play with some children. The dog that had once been his only companion was now the beloved mascot of the park, symbolizing the bridge between William's lonely past and his vibrant present. "You know what amazes me the most," Sophia reflected. "How a call for help to save a shelter ended up saving so much more. It saved an important part of the city, reconnected people, and rescued stories that might have been lost." William smiled, watching the sunset through the trees. The walls he had built around himself had turned into bridges, and his search for security had transformed into a much larger mission of protection. In the end, his mother was right. True wealth lies in the connections we make, the causes we champion, and the love we share, whether for people, animals, or nature itself. The legacy of the Guardians lived on, not just in documents and records, but in the example of how unity, perseverance, and love for what truly matters can transform not only a place but also the people who are part of it.